It happened out of the blue. Normally, if somebody's interested in getting into film scoring, they have to go down to Hollywood, live in Hollywood, and knock on doors for a few years. And if they finally get a chance to do something for a film, the budget might be big enough for them to be able to hire a kazoo player and a drummer, and that's about it. And this stumbled into my lap. I got a phone call from Philip Kaufman out of the blue saying, "Hey, you know, uh, I grew up in Chicago, as I know you did, and I remember hearing you play there, and I've heard some of your early albums, and I'm doing this remake of a classic science fiction horror film, and I think it needs a jazz score, and I'm wondering whether you'd be interested in doing it." And that's where it started. And then I had to convince his producer that I was capable of doing it because at that point I had credentials as a musician, I had some credentials as an electronics expert, but I had never written for a symphony orchestra. And Philip wanted electronics, but he also wanted a full scale symphonic score. I had to convince the producer that I was capable of doing it. I think if I'd been in Bob Solo's shoes, I would not have hired me. But I convinced him and we did it, and I was grateful. And it was a very exciting and very arduous, the most challenging thing I ever did involving music at that time. It was a 10 or 12 weeks, almost full time music. For a few weeks, I continued to see patients. Then I had somebody covering emergencies for me in case any arose. And I was then full time in music, working 20 hours a day with a whole setup downstairs, recording electro and acoustic music, writing the score for this 60-piece orchestra and how they were going to come together. I found a great orchestrator who worked with me, a guy named Greg McRitchie, who had done, dozens of films doing the orchestration. And he had great respect for what I was doing. He didn't really change any notes that I sent him, but he would make these critical decisions about, well, we should put three trombones on that one, and here's its flugelhorns here, and instead of just just the cello, we're going to have bass there too. These are decisions I could not have made. I had no experience doing this, but I sort of thought orchestrally in a big sense, so that the scores I would send him included my ideas of who was doing what, but then he would make these specific decisions on individual instruments. He did a magnificent job. And so it really turned out to be very successful. It was challenging, but very, very deeply satisfying. And I was glad we got a soundtrack album out of it because that doesn't always happen with every film. And the experience of being in this big sound stage in Hollywood uh, and hearing my music just explode into life by a whole symphony of players was an excitement. I'd never had anything like that in my life. It just wow, it just almost like blew the top of my head off. And Roger Kellaway, who was very helpful to me in organizing who I would hire to help me with this project. I'd known him from the University of Illinois. And by that time, Roger had already scored 7 or 8 films of his own. And so I had him be the conductor for the orchestra. He did a beautiful job in that. So I just was lucky. I had top people in every respect on this project working with me.
Are you working on a project like that fairly close with like Philip Kaufman? Are you like watching a rough cut together and he's saying put music here?
It was very formally done. It's called what's called spotting the film. And this is where the musician, the composer, sits down with the director who has a videotape of the film at that point. And at this point, it really was a completed videotape. And we go scene by scene where he says, now this scene, we need to really ramp up the suspense. We got to have a dead cue on this that's gonna like a sting that underlines what's happening here. So I'm taking notes and all this stuff, and then eventually the music editor provides me with a sheet for each section, which is called a cue. Each musical cue, which might be a minute or minute and a half or even 30 seconds sometimes, to the hundredth of a second, every bit of action that occurs in that scene, so that then I can plan how this music has to underline the events of that scene structurally and emotionally. And so typically what I would have to do for each cue, I would have to generate a click track that the orchestra would eventually be playing to, that would be at the right tempo for what I want to use. And then at each point I would be able to see, because there was a big book of click tracks that would show timing hundredths of a second for each tempo that you might choose. And I then would have to lay out the scene structurally and then compose the music onto that format. So very painstaking, man. It's exhausting me even to think about this. Now they've got programs that are so easy, man. You can just do this almost like in real time, just play to the film. It was completely different world.
Did you have a mentor guiding you along with that sort of technical process?
Roger Kellaway gave me important hints. I mean, he told me about this click track book, and uh, also I got then what was the major text available on scoring for films, which was the title of it. It was Scoring for Films. I forget who the author was, but it was this big tome, and I just was my Bible, man. I just went through it and devoured it, and that was the deal.